Every morning, a quiet girl delivered newspapers and slept where hallways allowed. One misprinted headline caught her careful eye. What she wrote down challenged a powerful lie, pulled a billionaire into court, and proved that sometimes the smallest witness carries the heaviest truth when no one else was brave enough. At 4:17 a.m., the city was still deciding whether to wake up. Junie Wren tightened the straps of her canvas bag and waited for the light to change. The crosswalk hummed softly beneath her shoes. She stood very still, the way children do when they don't want to take up too much space. The newspaper stack rested against her hip, neatly squared corners aligned. She had folded each copy the same way, careful not to crease the headlines. Junie liked mornings before voices arrived, before questions, before people noticed where you were standing. She crossed the street when the signal allowed it, not a second early. Rules mattered. Rules kept things calm. Kept. The apartment building on Cedar Row rose in front of her glass doors, glowing with warm light. She paused, checking the address twice. She always checked twice. The lobby smelled like coffee and cleaning soap, clean, safe smells. She slid a paper under the doormat of 2A, then 2B, then 2C, each placed straight, logo facing up. Some mornings, people thanked her. Most mornings, they didn't open the door at all. Junie didn't mind. When her bag grew lighter, she sat on the low bench near the mailboxes. She didn't lean back. She kept her knees together, hands folded, like she might be asked to move at any moment. From her pocket, she took out a small pencil and a worn notebook with a soft blue cover. Inside were words she copied every day, headlines, dates, arrows pointing to lines that felt strange. Grown-up words sometimes shifted overnight. She didn't know why. She only knew they did. Junie wrote the date carefully. Tuesday. She listened to the building breathe, elevators rising, pipes ticking. Outside, the sky began to lighten. Morning would come soon, and she needed to be ready. There was an unspoken rule about hallways. Junie had learned it without anyone teaching her. You didn't lie down. You didn't block doors. You didn't make noise. You stayed visible enough not to look suspicious, but small enough not to be noticed. So she chose the corner near the mailroom where the security camera blinked patiently. Cameras meant rules. Rules meant safety. Junie lined her shoes neatly beside her bag. She smoothed her jacket even though it didn't wrinkle much. From the pocket, she took out the notebook again, flipping to yesterday's page. A man in a suit passed by, phone pressed to his ear. He glanced at her, slowed for half a second, then kept walking. Junie gave a polite nod anyway. Being polite cost nothing. She read the headline she had copied the night before. Court delays expected in Vance case. She had copied it twice. Once from the early edition. Once from the late. The words weren't the same. Junie frowned, not in anger, but in thought. She didn't understand courts. She didn't know what a case was, not really. But she understood when numbers didn't match. When sentences changed shape. Her pencil hovered, then she added a small note in the margin. Different again. A door opened somewhere above. Laughter floated down the stairwell. The sound made Junie smile just a little. She liked hearing people happy. It meant the building was doing what buildings were supposed to do, holding lives safely inside. She checked the time. Still early. Junie rested her back against the wall, careful not to scuff it. She didn't sleep. She never slept deeply in hallways. She just waited, eyes open, listening. Waiting for the sun. Waiting for the next delivery. Waiting for the words to stop moving. The paper came back, folded in half. A woman with tired eyes held it out to Junie at the front desk. "This one's wrong," she said, not unkindly. "Must be a misprint." Junie took it with both hands. "Thank you for telling me," she said, because that was the right thing to say. She stepped aside so the woman could leave, then carefully unfolded the page. The headline was familiar. Too familiar. Junie's eyes moved slowly, line by line. She compared it to the version in her notebook. The date matched. The name matched. But one sentence was missing. Not smudged. Not blurry. Gone. Junie's heart didn't race. Instead, it sank in a quiet, steady way, like when you reach for a step that isn't there. She sat down and placed the paper flat on her knees. She reread it twice, then once more, just to be sure. Grown-up words weren't supposed to disappear. They were heavy words, important words. They stayed put, unless someone moved them. Junie opened her notebook and turned to a fresh page. Her pencil made soft, careful sounds as she copied the headline exactly as printed. Then beneath it, she wrote the missing sentence from memory, slow and precise. She added the time. She added the apartment number. She added a small star in the corner, the mark she used when something felt different enough to remember later. The lobby door opened. Cold air rushed in. Junie looked up quickly, closing the notebook. Morning had officially arrived. She slipped the misprinted paper back into her bag, smoothed her jacket, and stood. There were more doors to reach, more words to watch, and Junie Wren very quietly kept paying attention. Caldwell Vance watched himself on mute. The television in his office showed his face in clean lighting, the kind that softened edges and made everything look simpler than it was. A banner crawled across the bottom of the screen, measured words chosen carefully. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. On his desk lay a stack of legal briefs unopened. Caldwell already knew what they said. Allegations, delays. A story that had started running ahead of the facts. His name had become a headline before it became a sentence. Across from him, Maris Hale rested her elbows on her knees. She didn't interrupt the silence. She knew him too well for that. "They're shaping expectations," she said finally. "Not the court. The public." Caldwell nodded once, before the filings even land. "Yes." He reached for the remote and turned the volume on. A commentator spoke about missing documentation, about uncertainty, about how markets disliked confusion. Caldwell switched it off again. "Do we have the record?" he asked. Maris hesitated. "Not long, but long enough." "We have a record," she said. "But parts of it don't match what's being reported." Caldwell leaned back, eyes fixed on the dark screen. He had built his life on systems checks, balances, transparency. He believed in institutions. He believed in process. But he also believed in patterns. "And you think this isn't accidental?" he said. Maris shook her head. "No. It's too consistent." A knock came at the door. An assistant peeked in, reminding Caldwell of a morning meeting across town. He stood smoothing his jacket, every movement controlled. "Let's not rush," Caldwell said as they walked. "If the truth is slower, we'll wait with it." As they stepped into the elevator, the screen outside replayed his image again. The doors closed gently. Neither of them noticed the small girl down the street folding newspapers with careful hands. Junie liked the quiet after deliveries were done. It was the only time the world seemed to hold its breath. She sat on the low step by the lobby window, sunlight beginning to stretch across the floor. Her bag was lighter now, but she kept it close anyway. From it, she pulled out yesterday's paper, today's paper, and her notebook. She placed them side by side. The headline was the same. The name was the same. But the sentence underneath about delays, about responsibility, had changed shape. One version softened it. The other sharpened it, like someone had decided which way the story should lean. Junie didn't know who decided those things. She only knew they mattered. She pressed the papers flat and traced the lines with her finger, whispering the words to herself. Reading out loud helped her remember. It helped her feel sure. A security guard passed through the lobby and slowed when he saw her. "Morning," he said, neutral, not unkind. "Good morning," Junie replied, sitting up straighter. He nodded and moved on. Junie opened her notebook to a fresh page and began to copy, letter by letter, patient and exact. She wrote the time again. She wrote the building address again. She wrote a small note she had never written before. Early version said something else. Her pencil paused. Junie glanced up at the television mounted above the mailboxes. It was on now, the sound low. A man in a dark suit spoke with practiced calm. His name appeared beneath him. Caldwell Vance. Junie tilted her head. She looked back at the paper, then at the screen, then at her notebook. The words were connected. She didn't know how, but she felt it the way you feel a door close somewhere behind you without hearing it. Junie underlined the sentence once, carefully. The lobby doors opened smoothly, letting in a rush of cooler air. Caldwell Vance stepped inside, adjusting his cuff as he scanned the space. He was early for his meeting. He preferred it that way. Empty rooms told you things full ones didn't. His eyes moved automatically, security desk, elevator, bank exits. Then they stopped. Near the mailroom, in a neat corner of open space, sat a small girl with a canvas bag at her feet. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't wandering. She sat as if she had chosen the spot carefully and intended to respect it. Caldwell slowed. The building manager, Mr. Darlow, noticed at the same time. His shoulders tightened as he approached Junie. "Hey there," he said, keeping his voice firm but controlled. "You can't stay here." Junie stood immediately. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm just waiting until morning deliveries are finished." Darlow sighed, already preparing to repeat himself. Caldwell raised a hand, not commanding, just requesting space. "Is she causing a problem?" he asked. Darlow hesitated. "No, sir, just policy." Caldwell looked at Junie. "What's your name, Junie?" she said. "Junie Wren." "Junie," he repeated. "Are you waiting for someone?" She shook her head. "I'm waiting for the light to be brighter, so I don't miss any doors." The answer landed softly and stayed. Caldwell considered her bag, the folded papers inside the notebook clutched protectively against her jacket. "Would you like to sit for a few more minutes?" he asked Darlow. Darlow nodded slowly. "A few." Caldwell crouched slightly so he wasn't towering. "There's a cafe downstairs," he said to Junie. "They have warm breakfast if you want. You don't have to." Junie thought about it. Then she nodded. "Yes, please." She reached into her pocket and held out a coin. Caldwell smiled gently and shook his head. "Keep it." As they walked toward the elevator, Caldwell glanced once more at the small notebook in her hands. And for the first time that morning, the case on every screen felt different. The cafe downstairs was warm in a way lobbies never were. Junie sat at the small round table with her hands folded in her lap, waiting. She didn't touch anything until Caldwell nodded. Only then did she slide onto the chair, careful not to scrape it against the floor. The smell of eggs and toast filled the air, steady and comforting. Caldwell ordered simply. No rush. No show. When the food arrived, Junie looked at it for a second longer than necessary, as if making sure it was real. Then she ate slowly, politely, every bite measured. Caldwell watched without staring. He had learned long ago that kindness didn't need an audience. "You deliver the papers here?" he asked gently. "Yes, sir," Junie said. "Every morning. Do you like it?" Junie considered the question seriously. "I like mornings," she said. "They don't argue yet." That earned a quiet smile. Caldwell noticed the notebook then sitting beside her plate. The cover was soft, worn thin at the corners. He didn't reach for it. He asked, "Is that for school?" Junie shook her head. "It's for remembering." Remembering what? She hesitated, not from fear, but from thought. When words don't stay where they're supposed to. Caldwell's smile faded, replaced by curiosity. "What do you mean?" Junie opened the notebook carefully and turned it toward him. Pages of neat handwriting filled it, dates, times, short copied lines. Some had small stars in the margins. Others had arrows. "I copy the headlines," she said. "Sometimes they change later. Just a little. But it's not the same story anymore." Caldwell read one page, then another. His jaw tightened, not in anger but in recognition. "Do you know whose name this is?" he asked, pointing. Junie glanced at the page, then at him. "It's yours," she said simply. "You're on the screen a lot." Caldwell leaned back slowly. The room felt quieter. "Junie," he said carefully, "would it be all right if someone I trust looked at this too?" Junie nodded. "That's why I wrote it down." Maris Hale arrived 15 minutes later. She didn't rush. She never rushed when something mattered. She greeted Junie at eye level, introduced herself, and asked permission before sitting at the table. Caldwell noticed that. He always did. Junie, Maris said, voice warm but precise. "Caldwell tells me you keep very good notes." Junie slid the notebook across the table with both hands. "I try not to miss things." Maris opened it. She read the first page quickly, then more slowly. Then she stopped turning pages altogether and just sat there, eyes fixed on a single line. Caldwell waited. "These aren't guesses," Maris said quietly. "These are comparisons." Junie nodded. "I put the times so I don't forget which one came first." Maris looked up. "You wrote down addresses too?" "Yes, ma'am. Some buildings get the early paper, some get the later one." Maris closed the notebook gently, as if it were fragile. "Do you still have the papers?" Junie reached into her bag and pulled out 2 folded copies. She smoothed them flat on the table, aligning the headlines side by side. The difference was subtle. A word replaced. A sentence shortened. A responsibility softened into uncertainty. Maris inhaled slowly. "This isn't an error," she said. "This is direction." Caldwell felt something settle into place. Not relief, resolve. Maris met his eyes. Someone is shaping public understanding before filings are complete. That's dangerous. Junie shifted in her seat. "Did I do something wrong? No?" Maris said immediately, turning back to her. "You did something very right." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But this means we need to be careful too. We protect you first. Always." Junie nodded, trusting. Maris gathered the papers and the notebook. "We'll document everything properly," she said to Caldwell. "Chain of custody, verification, quietly." Caldwell nodded, and Junie. Maris smiled gently. "Junie stays safe." Junie looked between them. "Will the words stop moving?" Maris answered honestly. "If we're careful, they might." Caldwell insisted on doing everything the right way. No shortcuts. No quiet deals. With Maris present, he spoke to the building manager and security, explaining calmly that Junie would remain in public supervised spaces only. Nothing hidden. Nothing improper. Arrangements were made for Junie to wait during mornings in the cafe or lobby seating places meant for people. Maris made a call as well, not dramatic, not urgent, just responsible. She explained Junie's situation in careful terms, focusing on safety and routine. Options were discussed. Oversight. Support. Junie listened without interrupting, feet swinging slightly above the floor. "Do I have to stop delivering papers?" she asked quietly. "No," Caldwell said at once. "Only if you want to." Junie thought about that. "I want to keep going," she said. "I just don't want to be in the way." "You're not," Caldwell said firmly. "And we'll make sure you're not alone." A staff member from Caldwell's foundation arrived, a woman with a calm smile and a clipboard. She knelt beside Junie, introducing herself, asking what Junie liked to read, what mornings felt like to her. Junie answered carefully. Honestly, by the time the sun climbed higher, Junie had a plan for the next morning, a ride arranged, a supervised place to sit and read, breakfast that didn't feel borrowed. Before leaving, Junie tugged gently on Caldwell's sleeve. "Are you in trouble?" she asked. Caldwell crouched to her level. "People are saying things," he said. "But the truth matters more than noise." Junie nodded. "That's why I write it down." Caldwell smiled, not wide, but real. "I'm glad you do." As Junie walked out with the foundation staff notebook tucked safely under her arm, Caldwell watched her go. For the first time since his name had filled the screens, he felt something stronger than defense. He felt responsibility. And somewhere between headlines and hallways, the story had shifted from accusation to care. Caldwell refused to let urgency replace judgment. By mid-morning, the Foundation office was calm and bright, designed for openness rather than power. Glass walls, long tables, people speaking in measured voices. Junie sat at the end of one table with a cup of warm milk, her notebook beside her untouched, unless asked for. Maris coordinated everything with care. She explained step by step what would happen next, who would look at the papers, how copies would be made, how originals would be logged and returned. No secrecy, no pressure. Every decision was spoken out loud, including the option to pause at any time. Junie listened closely. So, I don't have to say anything if I don't want to, she asked. Exactly, Maris said. You choose. Always. Junie nodded. That mattered. An investigator from a neutral firm arrived, not stern, not rushed. He asked simple questions and thanked Junie after each answer. He photographed the papers where they lay, then sealed them in clear sleeves labeling time and place. Caldwell watched Junie's shoulders relax a little. Later, Maris pulled Caldwell aside. There's a problem, she said quietly. What kind? The publisher's official archive doesn't show these versions. The later editions are logged. The earlier ones, she exhaled. They're missing. Caldwell frowned. Missing how, as if they never existed. The words landed heavier than any accusation. Without the archive, the misprints could be dismissed as mistakes, or worse, dismissed entirely. Across the room, Junie traced the rim of her cup with one finger. She sensed the shift without understanding the details. Did something go wrong? She asked softly. Maris knelt beside her. Not wrong, she said. Just harder. Junie thought for a moment. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out the notebook again. I wrote where I put them, she said. The doors. The times. Maris's eyes widened slightly. Caldwell felt the air change. Maybe the truth hadn't disappeared. Maybe it had just been waiting. The call came that afternoon. Maris put it on speaker not to intimidate, but to keep everything clean. The voice on the line was polished, friendly, careful with every syllable. We're hoping to resolve things efficiently, the man said. No need for a drawn-out process. Public confusion benefits no one. Maris leaned back. What are you proposing? A mutual understanding, he replied smoothly. Statements adjusted, timelines simplified, everyone moves forward. Caldwell closed his eyes for a brief second. He had heard this language before. It never sounded like a threat. It never needed to. And the child Maris asked. A pause. Short. Calculated. She's mistaken, the man said. Children often are. Maris ended the call without another word. Junie looked up from her chair. Was that about me? Caldwell moved closer immediately. It was about avoiding the truth, he said. And we don't do that. Junie hesitated. If I didn't write anything else, would it stop? The question was quiet, brave, heavy. Maris answered carefully. Things might feel calmer for a while, but the story would stay wrong. Junie stared at her notebook. The pages felt heavier now. Writing had always been simple, just paying attention. Now it had weight. Would I still have breakfast here? Junie asked. Yes, Caldwell said without hesitation. And a place to sit, Junie nodded slowly. Then I think, the words should stay where they are. No one clapped. No one praised her. They simply respected her choice. Maris smiled softly. Then we keep going. As evening approached, confirmations began to arrive, emails from residents who remembered the early paper. Building logs verified delivery windows. Small pieces. Real pieces. Junie watched the adults work, feeling tired but steady. For the first time, telling the truth didn't feel lonely. The timeline came together quietly. Maris spread documents across the table: delivery times, addresses, security logs, confirmation notes. Nothing dramatic. Just alignment, order. Junie sat beside her, pointing when asked. This door, she said. They like the paper folded like this. And this one they open early. Each detail slid into place like it had been waiting. The investigator nodded. This establishes distribution patterns, he said. Not random, intentional. Caldwell felt a slow, steady calm replace the tension in his chest. This wasn't luck. It was care. By the time the sun dipped low, the case had a spine. Maris closed the folder. We're ready to file, she said. But once we do, it becomes public. People will talk. Junie looked out the window at the changing light. They already do, she said. Caldwell smiled gently. They do. He knelt beside her. Junie, tomorrow might feel louder, but you won't face it alone. Ever. Junie met his eyes. I'm not scared, she said. Just careful. That's enough, Caldwell replied. As Junie gathered her notebook, Maris added one last label to the file: verified distribution timeline, simple, unshakable. Outside, the city lights flickered on. Headlines would move again tonight. But now someone was watching closely. And this time the truth had a map. The filing hit the public record on a quiet morning. No press conference, no raised voices, just documents uploaded, timestamps verified, and a simple statement from Maris Hale's office. Certain published information does not match original distributions. Within an hour, the response arrived. Not loud, not angry, dismissive. A formal motion challenged the credibility of the evidence, not the facts, but the source. The language was smooth, clinical, carefully respectful on the surface. Unverified materials, irregular distribution claims, notes produced by a minor. Maris read it once, then again, her jaw tightening slightly. Caldwell watched from across the table. They're not attacking her, Maris said. They're trying to erase her. Junie sat nearby, coloring quietly. She wasn't listening, but children had a way of feeling shifts in rooms. She looked up when Maris stopped speaking. Did I make it messy? Junie asked. Maris crossed the room immediately and knelt beside her. No, she said. You made it clear. Sometimes clear things make people uncomfortable. The court scheduled a preliminary hearing to determine admissibility. Not guilt, not innocence, just whether the evidence could exist in the room. It felt smaller than a trial. But the stakes were sharper. That afternoon, a response brief arrived from the opposing side's counsel, measured, polite, devastating in implication. They argued the early editions could not be authenticated without the publisher's archive. They suggested distribution variations were common. They acknowledged Junie's good intentions, then gently questioned reliability. Caldwell read the final line twice. The court should proceed without informal observations. Without Junie. He closed the folder slowly. We're not proceeding without her, he said. Maris nodded. I agree, but we need something more solid, something external. That evening, confirmations began to falter. One resident declined to sign, nervous, apologetic. Another said they couldn't be sure anymore. Memory, it turned out, was fragile when pressure arrived. Junie noticed the change. She didn't ask questions. Instead, she opened her notebook and turned to the back. There's more, she said quietly. Maris looked up. More. What? Junie flipped to a page filled with small boxes and arrows. I draw the routes, she explained, so I don't get lost. Times, addresses, arrows showing sequence, notes about which buildings received which edition first. Not just what, but how. The investigator leaned forward. This is operational detail. Maris felt a cautious spark. Junie, did anyone tell you to write this? Junie shook her head. No, I just didn't want to forget. For the first time all day, the room breathed again. The record hadn't disappeared. It had been living somewhere quieter, The courtroom for the preliminary hearing was smaller than people expected. No cameras inside, no dramatic entrances, just wood benches, muted light, and a judge known for patience more than spectacle. Junie arrived early, accompanied by Maris and a Foundation staff member trained for exactly this purpose. Caldwell waited until he was invited to approach. Nothing improvised, everything by the book. The opposing counsel spoke first. He was calm, almost kind. He praised diligence. He acknowledged concern about public confusion. Then he outlined his argument without archival confirmation. The early editions were unverifiable. Notes made by a child, however earnest, could not substitute for institutional records. He never raised his voice. That was what made it dangerous. Maris stood next. She didn't begin with Junie. She began with systems. She presented security logs from multiple buildings verifying delivery windows. She introduced time-stamped maintenance records showing which doors were opened when. She submitted vendor metadata routing schedules that matched Junie's maps precisely. Only then did she speak about Junie. Ms. Wren did not interpret law, Maris said. She observed distribution. She documented sequence. She did not draw conclusions. She preserved facts. The judge leaned forward slightly. And the notebook, the judge asked. Maris held it up. A contemporaneous record. Consistent. Corroborated. Opposing counsel objected softly. Your Honor, we're still discussing materials produced by a minor. The judge nodded once. And minors can observe reality. Silence followed. Junie sat very still, feet not touching the floor. Her hands rested in her lap. She was not called to speak. No one asked her where she lived. No one asked her to explain herself. She was protected. After a pause, the judge spoke again. The court will admit the materials for limited purpose, contextual evaluation only. It wasn't a full win, but it wasn't a loss. Outside the courtroom, Caldwell exhaled for the first time in hours. Maris smiled, tired but steady. Junie looked up. Is that okay? It's good, Maris said. It means the truth gets a chair in the room. Junie considered that. Does it get a table? Maris laughed softly. Soon. But the relief didn't last long. By evening, headlines shifted again. Words like disputed and questioned appeared. The story bent, but didn't break. Caldwell stood by the window of his office that night, city lights blurring together. We're close, he said. Maris joined him. Close enough to scare them, and scared systems pushed back. The full hearing date was set. Between now and then, both sides prepared carefully. Statements were refined. Evidence stacks grew heavier. The noise outside increased, but inside the Foundation office, things stayed quiet. Junie kept her routine. She still delivered papers in the mornings now, with supervision arranged properly. She still read headlines. She still wrote things down. But something had changed. She hesitated before opening her notebook. One afternoon, Maris noticed. What's wrong? Junie stared at the blank page. If I stop writing, she said slowly, will it be easier? Maris didn't answer immediately. It might be quieter, she said finally. But it wouldn't be truer. Junie nodded, absorbing that. Later that day, a sealed filing arrived from the opposing counsel. It included a request, not a demand, for the court to limit references to Junie's materials to written submissions only. No oral discussion, no emphasis. They want her invisible, Caldwell said. Maris nodded. Because she doesn't fit their narrative. The judge's clerk scheduled a short procedural conference. No testimony, just clarifications. But one question landed unexpectedly. Does the court need to know the child's circumstances? The clerk asked to assess context. Maris stiffened. Caldwell felt his stomach drop. No, Maris said immediately. Her circumstances are irrelevant to the facts. The line went quiet. Afterward, Junie sat alone at the table, notebook closed. I don't want people to look at me like I'm a reason, she said. I just want them to look at the words. Caldwell knelt beside her. And they will, he said. Because we'll make sure they do. He made a decision that evening. If the court wanted context, they would give it without exposing Junie. Without spectacle. Without harm. They would let systems speak. The next morning, Maris filed supplemental materials, anonymized route data, third-party audits, vendor communications. The notebook was referenced, but not displayed. Junie's work would matter. Junie herself would be protected. When Maris told her, Junie looked relieved. "I don't like being the loud part," she said. "You're not," Maris replied. "You're the steady part." As night fell, Junie sat at the window of her small room reading the paper one last time. The headline held. The sentence stayed where it was. Junie opened her notebook and wrote a single line. Still, tomorrow would be louder. But tonight the truth was resting. The courtroom did not feel dramatic. There were no flashing cameras inside, no raised voices, just a quiet room built to listen carefully. Wood panels absorbed sound. Light filtered in from high windows, soft, and even as if the day itself had been instructed not to interfere. Junie sat in the second row, feet dangling slightly above the floor. A foundation advocate sat beside her, hands folded, presence steady. Maris was a few steps ahead, papers aligned, shoulders squared. Caldwell sat behind them, silent, composed, carrying the weight without showing it. The judge entered without ceremony. "Let's proceed," she said. Opposing counsel stood first. He spoke slowly, politely, with the practiced calm of someone used to being believed. He outlined his argument without accusation. Information discrepancies were unfortunate but common. Distribution variations happened. Archival gaps were not proof of intent. And while the court's sympathy for a child was understandable, emotion could not replace institutional verification. He never mentioned Junie by name. That omission was deliberate. Maris stood when it was her turn. She did not rush to counter him. She began with a single sentence. "This case is not about sympathy," she said. "It is about sequence." She laid out the timeline step by step. Delivery routes, timestamps, building access logs, independent confirmations, vendor metadata. Each document placed into the record carefully, one after another, like stones forming a path across water. "The question before this court," Maris continued, "is not whether words were printed differently. It is whether those differences were directed." She paused. "And whether the public was guided before the law could speak." The judge leaned forward slightly. Maris gestured toward the exhibits. "The early editions show unsoftened language. The later editions alter responsibility. The timing of that alteration aligns with vendor communications introduced here." Opposing counsel objected gently. "Inference." Maris nodded. "Pattern." The judge allowed her to continue. Maris did not ask Junie to speak. She did not point to her. She referenced the notebook only as contemporaneous observation, corroborated externally. Junie sat very still. She was not afraid. But she understood something important was happening. Her hands were folded the way she had learned to keep them when adults were working. The judge asked a question that quieted the room. "Is the court being asked to weigh a child's words against an institution's record?" Maris answered without hesitation. "No, Your Honor. The court is being asked to weigh facts against a missing record." Silence followed. The judge nodded slowly. Opposing counsel rose again. "Your Honor, without the publisher's archive, this court is being asked to accept an incomplete picture." Maris replied. "With respect, Your Honor, absence is not neutrality." The room held its breath. This was not the verdict, but the ground had shifted. The second day was quieter. That was how pressure worked at this level. It lowered its voice. The judge opened with procedural clarifications. Evidence admitted, scope defined, boundaries set. At no point was Junie singled out. At no point was her personal life raised. And then the judge asked a question no one had prepared for. Who controlled the language changes, she asked. Opposing counsel adjusted his glasses. Your Honor, we dispute that any directed change occurred. The judge nodded. Then help me understand the decision-making process. Vendor emails were introduced, schedules, a memo referencing public perception alignment. The phrase landed like a pebble dropped into water. Maris stood. Alignment with what opposing counsel objected. The judge overruled calmly. Maris read from the memo. Not the whole thing, just one line. Recommend tone adjustment prior to filings to reduce market instability. The room went still. Caldwell closed his eyes briefly. This was the moment. Not a shout, not a revelation, just clarity. Opposing counsel responded carefully. Standard communications language. Maris nodded. Then let's discuss timing. She displayed a simple chart delivery windows on one axis, headline language on the other. The point of change was precise. Before filings, Maris said. Before response. Before court. The judge looked at the chart, then back at opposing counsel. Who authorized this recommendation? There was a pause, not long, but long enough. Names were offered, roles described, distance created. The judge took notes. Then she turned unexpectedly toward Junie, not directly, but toward Maris. Miss Hale, she said, the court has reviewed the child's materials. They are factual in nature. Do you intend to rely on her testimony? Maris stood straighter. No, Your Honor, she said. We intend to rely on the systems that confirmed what she observed. Junie's shoulders relaxed without her realizing it. The judge nodded. Very well. Opposing counsel tried once more. Your Honor, the presence of a child in this matter risks undue influence. The judge raised a hand. The presence of a child, she said evenly, has been handled with restraint and respect. The court finds no impropriety. Silence followed again. This time it felt different, not tense, resolved. Junie looked at Maris, who gave her the smallest nod. You're safe. You did enough. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited, but Caldwell exited through a private corridor. No statements, no sound bites. That evening, Junie sat at the foundation office table, drawing quietly. Is it over? She asked. Almost, Caldwell said. The loudest part is done. Junie smiled faintly. I don't like loud. Neither do I, he replied. The ruling came in writing. No cameras, no gavel strike, just pages. Maris read it aloud in a quiet conference room. Caldwell listened, hands clasped. Junie sat nearby, swinging her feet, coloring a sun in the corner of her notebook. The court found that the evidence demonstrated directed alteration of public-facing language prior to judicial proceedings. It ordered corrective disclosures. It referred vendor conduct for review. It affirmed that the court's process had been compromised not by a child, but by adults who should have known better. Caldwell's name was cleared, not loudly, but completely. Maris closed the document. It's done, she said. Junie looked up. The words stayed. Maris smiled. They stayed. Caldwell felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't realized was still tight. He turned to Junie. Thank you, he said. Junie shook her head. I just wrote them down. That was enough, Caldwell replied. Later that afternoon, Caldwell met privately with Maris. I want to do this properly, he said. Long-term, with oversight. Maris nodded. We'll start the process, slowly, transparently. Junie was included in the conversation not as a subject but as a voice. I like mornings, she said, and tables, and lamps. Caldwell smiled. We can do that. That night, Junie slept in a small, quiet room with a lamp that didn't flicker. Her notebook rested on the desk beside her, closed for once. In the morning, she woke before the alarm. Old habit. She reached for the paper on the table and read the headline. It was accurate. She smiled to herself. At breakfast, Caldwell sat across from her, tie half nodded, holding his own paper. Junie pointed to the front page. They didn't move it, she said. Caldwell followed her finger. No, he said, they didn't. Junie folded her paper carefully. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, something had changed. Not just a case, a life. The city did not stop when the ruling came. Traffic moved, cafes opened, screens refreshed with new stories. The world, always eager for the next headline, took a breath and shifted its attention elsewhere. Inside the foundation office, the air was quieter than it had been in weeks. Caldwell stood by the window watching people cross the street below. No one recognized him. No one pointed. For the first time in months, his name did not feel heavy in the room. Maris placed a thin folder on the table. "Corrective disclosures are underway," she said. "The vendor review will take time, but the language is clear." Caldwell nodded. "Good." Junie sat at the table with a stack of scrap paper and a box of crayons. She drew buildings with windows that all faced the same direction. Lamps glowed in every room. She colored slowly, carefully, like each choice mattered. "Is everything finished?" she asked without looking up. Maris smiled. "The loud part is." Junie considered that. "I like when things are quiet again." Caldwell turned from the window and sat across from her. "So do I." They didn't talk about the case. Not directly. They talked about mornings, how Junie liked to wake early even when she didn't have to, how Caldwell drank his coffee black because it reminded him to pay attention. Maris watched them with a soft, thoughtful expression. Later, she excused herself to take a call. When she returned, she carried a different folder. Thicker, labeled carefully. "This is the next step," she said, placing it between them. "It's not a promise, it's a process." Junie looked at the folder, then at Caldwell. "Do I have to decide today?" "No," Caldwell said immediately. "You never have to decide today." Junie nodded, relieved. That afternoon, a letter arrived from the building manager, Mr. Darlow. He apologized formally, sincerely, for not noticing sooner. He offered access to the community room in the mornings for other delivery kids, supervised and warm. Junie read it twice. "That's nice," she said. "For them." Caldwell smiled. "You changed more than one thing." Junie shrugged, a small motion. "I just stayed where I could see." As evening came, Junie packed her notebook into her bag. She paused, then took it back out and placed it on the table instead. "I don't need to write tonight," she said. Maris nodded. "You've earned a rest." The lights dimmed automatically. Outside, the city glowed. For the first time, Junie felt like the night was not something to wait through, but something that belonged to her, too. Junie woke before the alarm. Old habits were gentle but persistent. She lay still for a moment, listening. The room was quiet, not empty, but peaceful. A lamp stood on the desk, its light steady. A chair waited where she had left it. She sat up and smiled. In the kitchen, Caldwell was already awake, sleeves rolled up, tie resting untied on the counter. A newspaper lay open beside a plate of toast. The kettle hummed softly. "Good morning," Junie said. "Good morning," Caldwell replied. "Did you sleep?" "Yes," she said, surprised by how easy the word felt. They ate together without rushing. No agenda. No headlines discussed out loud. When Junie finished, she folded her napkin neatly and glanced at the paper. "The sentence stayed," she said, pointing. Caldwell followed her finger. It did. After breakfast, Maris arrived not in a suit this time, but in a simple coat. She carried a small calendar. "We'll go slowly," she said. "School options, reading programs, morning routines. You get to say what works." Junie nodded. "I like routines." They walked outside together. The air was cool, clean. The city looked different in daylight, less sharp, more forgiving. At the corner, a delivery truck passed. Junie watched it go, then looked up at Caldwell. "I still want to deliver papers sometimes," she said. "With someone." "That can be arranged," Caldwell said. "Safely." Junie smiled, small, certain. They stopped at a crosswalk. The signal changed. Junie waited until it was fully green. Rules still mattered. As they crossed, Junie reached into her bag and pulled out the notebook. She opened to the last page and wrote one line, neat and careful. "Morning is quiet now." She closed the notebook and handed it to Caldwell. "You can keep it," she said, "just in case words move again." Caldwell accepted it with both hands. "I will." They continued down the street together, not in a hurry, not drawing attention. Behind them, the city carried on. Ahead of them, the day opened gently wide enough for truth, steady enough for hope. The city woke gently that morning. Not all at once. Not loudly. Just enough to feel alive. Junie stood by the window watching the light move across the buildings. It was a habit she kept not from waiting anymore, but from noticing. She liked to see where the day began. It made everything else feel possible. On the desk behind her, the notebook lay open. One page only. No arrows, no stars. Just a single line written neatly in pencil. "Morning is quiet now." Caldwell appeared in the doorway, Ty finally finished, coffee in hand. He didn't speak right away. He knew better than to interrupt moments that had chosen their own timing. "Ready?" he asked softly. Junie nodded and slipped the notebook into her bag, not because she needed it, but because it felt right to keep it close. They walked outside together. The street hummed with early routines. A woman unlocked her shop. A bus sighed at the corner. Somewhere a radio played low and hopeful. At the crosswalk, Junie waited for the signal. Green meant go. Red meant stay. Some rules she had learned were there to help. They crossed. A delivery cart rattled by, stacked with newspapers. Junie watched it, then smiled. Not with longing. With recognition. Caldwell noticed. "You still see everything he said." Junie shrugged lightly. "I always did." They reached the cafe on the corner, the same one from weeks ago. The door opened. Warmth spilled out. Familiar smells. Familiar sounds. But this time, Junie didn't pause to ask if she could enter. She walked in. Inside, Maris waited at a small table, a calendar folded beside her mug. She looked up and smiled, not the smile of a lawyer finishing a case, but of a person watching something good settle into place. Junie sat down and pulled out the paper from her bag. She scanned the front page. The headline was accurate. The sentence beneath it stayed exactly where it was. She tapped the page once. "They stayed," she said. Maris nodded. They did. Caldwell watched Junie fold the paper carefully, aligning the edges the way she always had. He realized then that nothing important about her had been erased, only the parts that had made life smaller. Outside, the city continued on, unaware of the quiet victory it had just witnessed. Inside, a child who once waited in hallways now chose where to sit, and the words finally knew better than to move. Did this story move your soul? Share your feelings in the comments and rate it from 1 to 10. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, then tap the bell icon so you never miss a new story. Click the end screen to watch another heartfelt video. See you in the next story.